Hello everyone. Welcome to the another session of DataHour series. So we will start the session within 5 minutes. Till then, let's know each others. So you can fill the poll, and a lot of us are from Asia. So the poll contains two questions, and that's about your location and your experience level. So in the experience level, we can see 0 to 3 years of people are a lot. So let's start the session. Hello and welcome to everyone. So this is another session of Data Art series. We are thrilled to be here with you in this evening session, which is full of action-packed learning. I am your host Umesh, which is a who is a part of data science team of Analytics Vidya. For those who have joined it the first time, let me give you a brief introduction about data art sessions. So, data art sessions is a series of webinars conducted by Analytics Vidya and which is led by top industry experts. It is a fun way to understand the concept of data science from the leading players of data tech domain. And as the name suggests, it's a 1 hour totally dedicated to data. So we are hopeful that these sessions are going to be a great source of enrichment and value adding for our community members. So today our session is going for forecasting stories. So through a series of stories, we shall discover some fascinating aspects of time series forecasting. We shall look at the high tech and pharmaceutical world for the case studies too. I hope you are excited to attend this data hour with us. Before we kick things off and I hand it over to the speaker, a quick recap for those high, housekeeping items. We are recording the sessions and will make the recording available in a few days on our YouTube channel of Analytics Vidya. And please use the Q&A section for asking any questions you might have during the sessions. And we will do our best to answer those data are during the progress session progress. And also, we will also share the poll about your feedback at the end of the session, which I request you to fill that. It will help us. So now let's introduce our speaker of the day, which is Rajneet Kaur, who is a senior technical project manager at Persistent Systems. And a little bit introduction about her. She is from some last decades. Rajneer has been enabling 50 plus client stakeholders to make better decisions through data science. She soon joins eClerx as an AVP, data science. She has built several processes in the area of marketing analytics, time series forecasting, NLP, and insights generation. In the last year, She has won the AI Changemaker Impact Award winner 3AI Top 10 Women in the IT Data Leader Asia. Rajneet is very passionate about learning and development and has taught 1,000 plus students as a faculty member as soon as through her course on Udemy. Now I am handing the stage to Rajneet. So the stage is over to you, Rajneet. It's the virtual state is now all yours.
All right. Thanks, Umesh. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Just will take a second to confirm if I'm clearly audible, my screen is visible, and I'm also visible.
Yeah, ma'am. Your screen is visible. You are clearly audible.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining on a Monday evening. It's a busy day, so really appreciate. But I promise you, we are going to have a lot of fun together because we're going to go through a series of forecasting stories. Right now, there is one more thing that Umesh did not tell you about me. That we all like stories, don't we? Right? But I love telling stories too. Right? And that is what we are going to do. So the characters of our stories, let me quickly introduce all of them to you. In the first story, we will meet Tom, who is the demand planner for two autoimmune disease-related drugs called Camicade and Dimpany. And in the second story, we'll meet Payal. She's also from the pharmaceutical world, and she's a demand planner for another drug called Helios. The third story, we are going to meet Eric, who is the sales and marketing head for North America for an OEM. So this is a very different world. This is the world of high tech, of laptops, desktops, enterprise infrastructure, servers, hyperconverged infrastructure, etc. Right? And along the way, in all of these stories, we're also going to meet Bhumi, who is their consultant. And let's just all of us try to imagine that we are Bhumi. And what would we do in a certain situation? So before we proceed, I would like to call out that let's try to keep it as interactive as possible. At any point, if there is a question, please raise it in the chat window. Someone will read it out. Maybe Abhinisha, Umesh, someone will read it out and we will resolve it then and there. At the same time, I will have some questions for you. We will pause there and I would love to hear your views. All right, I hope all of us are excited. Let's get started. So here comes the first story. And the story's name is It Seasonality? So like we discussed, we are going to meet Tom here. And let me take you back to 2014. Tom is the demand planner for Netherlands for a top pharmaceutical company, top 5 pharmaceutical company in the world, rather. And Bhumi is his consultant. So she handles the country engagement for Netherlands for 2 drugs. But they're not 2 ordinary drugs. These 2 drugs give you 70% revenue globally, right? So they are the most important drugs. Let's call them Camicade and Dimpany. And let me also tell you a little bit about the class they belong to. They belong to the autoimmune drugs class, right? So like we have diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, hypertension. This is autoimmune diseases. So a little bit about that. What happens, unfortunately, sometimes, maybe due to stress, maybe because you're taking too many drugs or you are falling sick very often, for whatever reason, your body starts attacking its own self, which means that it is not able to differentiate that this is a foreign body and this is my own cell, right? So it will start attacking your own cell as well. And there are more than 30 types of autoimmune diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, etc. Now, this is just a little bit of the background so that we understand what's coming up next. So in one of the syncs between Tom and Bhumi explains to Tom that there is something funny that's happening. You know, that when we look at the sales of Camicade and Dimpany in the left-hand side graph, every 3rd month for some reason is peaking. It has a higher sale. And for some strange reason, our forecasting engines, our algorithms are not picking that up. We are not seeing that trend in the forecast, that pattern in the forecast, right? Now, for those of us who have worked in time series forecasting, we know that seasonality is a period after which a pattern repeats. So for example, in most cases, you'll see 1 year is the seasonality, whether that's 12 months or 52 weeks, we'll see a similar pattern. So every time there is Diwali, there might be peak of crackers. Every time there is rainy, there might be peak of, rainy related aspects, right? So what Bhumi suggests here is that because it's not getting incorporated by default, let me explicitly introduce it. So let me manipulate the numbers and peak every third month. And Tom, he said that sounds good. Please incorporate the same. Sounds logical to him, right? So let's see what happens next. So the last peak we see here is July, and the third month after that being October 2014, we will expect that the next peak is to happen in October 2014, right? Let's see what happens next. So instead of October, in September, both these drugs peak. So why would have that happened? What is amiss? What have we missed out here? I would like each of us to think, and possibly you all, whether through chat or through audio, try it out. You can raise your hand, try it out. Why would it peak earlier? Let me also give you a hint. So the answer is hidden in plain sight in this calendar. This is the 2014 calendar organized by months and weeks. Something interesting is happening here. Anybody wants to take a shot? Yeah, sure. So we want to repeat the question. The question is that if you look at this graph, right, every third month is peaking historically, right? So the last peak happened in July. And if we were to forecast and extrapolate this pattern, August, September, October is supposed to peak. But what happens is not October, but 1 month earlier, September 2014 peaks. So why would the second month peak instead of the third month? That is the question. Can Umesh, Binisha, can you read out some of the answers?
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah.
So there is one answer, sudden demand rise.
Okay, possible
And,
sudden demand, right?
Yeah, seasonality shifting.
Okay, seasonality shifting, that's an interesting viewpoint.
Yeah, and there is another answer, population increase.
Okay, all right.
Outliers.
Uh-huh.
And approaching end of the year.
Okay, possible.
Climate change.
Okay.
Some disease erupted suddenly.
Okay.
Yeah, so others are also similar. Yeah, anticipated peak and number of days or weeks. Okay, there is an interesting answer by Srinivasa Meka. Before Thanksgiving, doctors release patients and prescriptions little early.
some feature was missing. Sudden pandemic, the way all of y'all are approached. Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am, now you are audible. A bit voice was breaking earlier.
Okay, okay. Oh, yeah. All right, so let me tell what really happened here, right? What had transpired is that, as Tom later explained, this is not really a case of seasonality, you know. So when we deep dive this scenario later, wholesalers placed orders on Mondays, okay, and these were shipped out on the next day, which is Tuesdays. So any month that had 5 Tuesdays, it's going to naturally peak, right? So you see April has 5 Tuesdays, July has 5 Tuesdays, September also has 5 Tuesdays. October does not have 5 Tuesdays, it has 5 Wednesdays. So this was a misjudged seasonality. This is called very famously the 4-4-5 effect, because every third month would have an extra Tuesday or a Wednesday, whatever day of week we say, right? So because we have those, see, after 28 days, which is a perfect multiple of 7, there might be extra 2 days or 3 days, and they can be any day of the week. So what is the moral of the story here? That if the granularity period, whether that is daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, if that does not match the granularity at which business transactions occur. So for example, in this scenario, we were forecasting at a monthly level, but transactions, business transactions, whether orders, shipments were happening at a weekly level. No, so we might observe peaks or dips, which is not actually seasonality. So one of the most power-packed inputs I have received from one of the CEOs of one of the companies that I work is, let's not just look at things from a coefficient correlation perspective, from just statistics, from just numeric perspective, right? There has to be some kind of business logic behind that seasonality, right? So for example, autoimmune diseases, by logic, by their definition, they do not need to peak in a winter or dip in a summer, any of those aspects, right? There might be certain other medicines which we may take. For example, allergy. If we were talking about allergy, they rise during rainy and winter. I'm sure many of us have fallen sick, right? During 3 months, many of our family members have fallen sick. As soon as rains and winter pick up, allergies also pick up. So that time, if certain pattern we are able to observe, that will still make sense. That can still be incorporated, right? I think there are a few questions. Some participants have raised hand. Can we just help them go ahead? Yeah, can we go ahead with the questions?
So we have a question that what is this term? Is there any particular term for this effect?
Which term? Can we elaborate, please?
Ma'am, the effect which we see here.
Yes, this was called, this specifically was called the 4-4-5 effect. It was not seasonality. So there are 4, let's say we are taking Tuesday as the day of the week, right? So there will be 4 Tuesdays, then 4 Tuesdays, and in the third month, there will be 5 Tuesdays. More or less, every third month will have that extra day of week. Yeah. Any
Yes,
other
ma'am.
questions? Okay, let's continue with our second story for the day, which is weather-driven seasonality is funny, right? The hero of our story is Helios. We were just talking about allergies, and this is an allergy-related drug. It treats something called as allergic rhinitis. The type of allergy, this type of allergy is driven by the amount of pollen grain density in the air. So whenever there is higher amount of pollen grains, this particular ailment will also increase. And logically, like we were discussing, logically, now we know if in October, November pollen season is on the high, then even Helios will be selling more. All right. So now here we are sure that we know the business logic why this drug should be seasonal in nature, right? Now, another aspect, right? We talk about seasons, okay, there is in different context. One context is weather-driven seasonality, right? But we say this is rainy season, we say this is a summer season. Another context is business context. So we say seasonal period chal raha hai, mera dhande ka period chal raha hai, right? Basically what we mean is that this is a peak, this is a higher sales period. But that is not what seasonality means in time series forecasting. Seasonality here refers to period after which a pattern repeats. So for example, in most scenarios that I have seen, 1 year is the seasonality. If you do a monthly forecast, then 12 months is your seasonality. If you do a weekly forecast, then 52 weeks is your seasonality, right? So seasonality is not just the peak you would observe in a Diwali, right? It is also the dip that you will see after Diwali. It is not just the peak in US, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas, New Year. These are often, for consumers, these are often periods of high sales. But after they go away, for a few weeks, there is a dip also. That is also part of the seasonality. So your seasonality is 12 months here. It is not a peak, okay, just to clear. Now, let's come back to the story of Helios and let's see what happens next, okay? So, in one of the monthly syncs, Bhumi is presenting to Payal, who is the demand planner for Helios, and she finds and shares an astonishing fact. What is this fact? Fact is that over the years, the seasonality period that we just discussed has reduced from 12 months to 11 months. Okay, so if you see this graph in between, you'll see that the highest correlation figure, if you do not know what an ACF plot is or what your correlation figures mean, do not worry, right? It simply means that after 12 months, the pattern repeats, right? But what is happening here, you'll see that 12 has a correlation value of 91%, but 11 months also has a correlation of 87%. So weather is shifting its nature. For some strange reason, we are seeing the season, the winter season, the pollen density related seasons coming slightly earlier. Okay. And therefore, what would that still mean? You know, even if I come to know what kind of business decisions can I take is very important. How will that information help Payal? First of all, it's very interesting, but how do we make that information useful? So this is how a Payal can benefit from it, right? She says, oh, really? Thank you. So she's both surprised and thankful. And she plans that she'll work with the production teams, SCM team, and sales team. Why each of these three teams? Because if we are going to experience higher need for Helios in earlier and earlier, instead of November, if we will require the same in October, then the production team needs to produce it earlier. The supply chain team also needs to supply it to the various distributors and wholesalers earlier. And the sales team also need to be able to sell it. So all of them now will be prepared for this earlier higher demand. So what is the moral of our story here? That seasonality can be tricky, even though by definition, it should repeat after a fixed period. Like I said, generally 1 year. And we saw a weather-driven related example, but this is equally true for the other type of seasonality, that is calendar-driven seasonality, right? We might be able to judge. Weather-driven seasonality is weather-related. So the pharmaceutical world will be highly impacted by it. What is calendar-driven seasonality? It is by the weeks, by the day, 365 days of the week. But Diwali last year was in November and this year it is in October. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, sometimes it changes slightly, once or twice. And for example, Good Friday in US, Good Friday is one event. So sometimes it happens in March, sometimes it happens in April. We know so many of our festivals happen on different days. So it might not be okay in one year, it might be in week 8, in the other year, it might be in week 10, right? So those are nuances that we will need to also look at. So that's our second story. And before we proceed, I would just like to check if there are any questions, any thoughts.
Ma'am, there are a few questions.
Yes.
One is how to incorporate this in time series algorithm.
That's a very good question. Typically, when you talk about time series forecasting, any kind of adjustments are often done outside of the forecast. So you run the forecast on actual history. You do not generally muddle, you do not touch the history. You do the forecast, and if there are adjustments, you explain those adjustments and do it outside. I hope that helps.
Yes, ma'am. So the next question is, what is the difference between ACF and PACF?
Okay, all right. Let me go back to this question, right? See, I'm going to take a step, and I can definitely share some material also, because we are going to have a mixed audience here. ACF, what that means is autocorrelation factor. So that implies ACF by itself gives you the seasonality period, right? So for example, my pattern is repeating after 12 months, okay? But there is something called as partial autocorrelation factor, where we are trying to see there is going to be some relation between period 1 and period 2, period 2 and period 3. So by the time I come from 1 to 12, there is not, I'm not just taking into account the relation between 0 and 12 or 1 and 12. I'm also, there is some impact of each of the n plus 2, n plus 3, n plus 4 also. So to remove the impact of all of these, there is a PACF plot we create, right? It's a discussion that can take a half an hour. So what I would suggest is that I will share some material on the same. Abhinisha, Umesh, if you can please share it with the team here. And yeah, if there are questions, we can take it up again.
Sure. So there is one more question. So how to perform time series forecasting on discrete time series data?
Okay. So when we say discrete time series data, can we just unmute this person and let them give an example?
Yeah, so this question has been raised by Swaminathan Shekhar.
Swaminathan, do you want to explain an example?
Hi all, thanks for the wonderful
Hello.
presentation. So what I want to mention is, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, okay. So consider this log files that is generated from the machine data. Like we have a system, right, computer system, where the log files also getting generated. And you consider the system, you consider any system or component. So when we use that component, you get to know the log files getting generated whenever it's in usage. So
Okay.
what I meant discrete data here is this machine is not completely working for 24/7. It uses whenever there is a need. So that means even the log files, the associated parameters files also got generated whenever it was in usage.
Okay.
So now we see the past history data. The data are discrete. I did not have a continuation on the respective usage. Probably, though it's a time series data because it involves time.
Okay.
So in that case, within this scenario, if you want to really talk or comment about the components failure within this respective system, if you want to go for a prediction, so what kind of techniques I can use?
Okay.
So till now, we have seen more on continuous. The example what you've shown also more on continuous in data. It's continuously occurring. In discrete entity or discrete scenarios, how this can be solved.
Okay. Okay. So first of all, see, very good question, Swaminathan. I believe everybody will benefit from this. Time series by itself, the definition is that you have consistent period of data. Okay, consistent granularity. I cannot have 1 week of data and then 1 month of data and then 1 day of data, right? It has to be continuous data that is aggregated at a certain level. So for example, here, sales data, every minute there might be some sales. There is no start and stop of sales. There is no pause. Like you said, the log files, I will create the log files as required. That process is like a start and stop process. So time series is not suited there, right? So a regression, depending on your problem statement, right? Like a regression kind of analysis may be suited when your cross-section data is available. Like for example, regression will work even when you do not have continuous data. But the typical time series forecasting algorithms will work on continuous data. Okay, I hope
so
that answers.
maybe I like to give you a real example. Maybe see, let's say you consider the CT scan machine that they use in the hospital.
Okay.
So CT scan machine need not be used for all 24/7 data.
Correct.
And based on the customer or based on the patients we have, it will be used accordingly. And when you are using the CT scan machine for a particular person, let's say you almost spend 45 minutes about understanding its component, all these things, right? So that means for the next 45 minutes, I will be generating time series data for the particular patient. So in CT scan machine, I have different components. But going forward, I want to really say our predictive maintenance, some kind of predictive maintenance or some kind of predicting of the components when the respective components will get failed, or when would be the next maintenance that I can do it for CT scan machines, because CT scan machines are quite expensive and quite needed always. So it should be, each hospital should have CT scan machine operate all the time. So they should not, like, the downtime should be reduced there. So you consider that scenario.
Okay, so let's say here our objective is to find and do preventive maintenance before reaching the breaking point, right? So what we would like to do is at a monthly level, let's say, or a weekly level, how many CT scans are being done, and if we know how, after usage of X number of times it is breaking. So possibly what you can do here is you can forecast the demand, right? You can forecast that so far, okay, month 150, month 200. Next month, I might have 150 requests for CT scan. So let me, instead of a monthly, preventive maintenance, once you've determined the breaking point, you say that I want to be able to do the preventive once instead of monthly level, twice in a month or at a weekly level, right? So you forecast the demand, and you also need to in parallel find the breaking point after usage of how many times is it reaching a breaking point. So you need to set a limit that 70% of breaking point I need to do the preventive, right? I hope, Swaminathan, that gives some perspective, and we can see
some perspective actually. But in real condition, if you see respectively these health missions, right, we won't able to generate a lot of data. Only with limited data, we need to see what best.
I guess Swaminathan audio got broken down.
It's funny, isn't it? Everybody thinks, so is it mine? My internet that has gone down. Okay. All right. Swaminathan, I hope you can hear me. Let's take it up once more because, see, any problem statement, the better we understand the objective, that way we can answer better, right? So let's take it up in detail. I have stored some minutes even at the end of the session. So we'll continue then. Are there other questions before we continue? Yeah. Can LSTM algorithm work on this type of data? At this point, I haven't worked very extensively on deep learning techniques, but LSTM is definitely being used across. So if you have it's long-term memory, right? LSTM technique. So if you have enough amount of history, definitely LSTM can work. right? And very interesting question again, what is the difference between cyclic and seasonal components, right? Okay, so seasonality is a period after which a pattern repeats. You know it is 1 year. Cyclic, so like for example, weather-driven seasonality, anything event-driven. Retail is very event-driven. Okay, so you will have an Amazon Prime Day, you will have Diwali, you'll have Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So it is calendar-driven, right? So you know 12 months is your period. Cyclic component, right? It is a more, I would say, tricky component because there is no fixed amount of time. It can repeat after 3 years, it can repeat after 4 years, 5 years, any amount of time, right? There is, for example, if you look at the stock market, every few years, let's say 4 years, it will be on the rise. Every few years, it will be slightly decreasing. So you know that pattern definitely is there, but there is no, per se, there is no fixed timeline you can put to it. That's your cyclic component. Quite frankly, I have worked at least 6-7 years in forecasting space itself, but I haven't come across a data set where you can clearly say there is cyclicity involved, right? So seasonality, you will definitely see in a lot of scenarios. Yeah. Okay, shall we continue? Are there any other questions, Mish?
Abhinisha, please update this.
Yes, ma'am. So there is a question raised by Abhishek Yadav. Could I not aggregate the total time and breaking point correlation?
Okay, total time. Oh, I think Abhishek, you're trying to answer Swaminathan's problem statement, right? Yes, we can do that. We can try to find a correlation between the time spent and whether it breaks or not. Yeah, we should be able to. Yeah.
And Krishna Raj has asked the difference between ARIMA and SARIMA model.
Yes. So SARIMA is the seasonal, it takes into account by default that you have seasonality. SARIMA is the seasonality added to ARIMA model. That is the difference. There is a SARIMAX model also, or ARIMAX, where X stands for the regression side of things. So for example, if I want to do a time series and regression in the same model, you can use an ARIMAX or SARIMAX. So the X there stands for exogenous or outside variables, like for example, price, marketing spends, etc.
And Nishak has a question like, from the time series forecasting, can we forecast stocks prices?
Good question. I am sorry, Nisarg, I do not have an answer to this because I haven't worked that much in the financial space, but price forecasting is very tricky. I don't know here if we can really do that. And, there are some data sets that I have worked. I can tell you one thing. In pharma world, in retail world, correlation statistics, they work better. In financial space, determining that correlations, they will not give you big numbers at all. You cannot easily do that. But yes, I am not the best person to answer this question. I'll pass. Right. Okay, and I think Abhishek is mentioning about the breaking point. So yes, it is related to Swaminathan. So yes, we can do, Abhishek, we can do that correlation try. Can we have a seasonality in 13 months? Oh, very good question, Lalit. So Lalit is asking, can we see if there is seasonality in 13 months, monthly data, right? Now, see, we cannot call a pattern till it has happened at least bare minimum 2 times. Even when it happens 2 times, we would say that it could be fluke, it could be by chance. So ideally, we want it to happen 3 times to say it's a pattern, it repeats, right? Now, if your seasonality period is, let's say, quarterly, right? So every 3rd month peaks. If our first story really had seasonality, then you have 4 sets of seasonal periods. In that case, 13 months data will work. But if your seasonality is 12 months, no matter. You can never be sure, right? Because seasonality, a sale period can be high or low for X number of factors. You are, let's say you reach today, you are late to office. It can be for X reasons, right? It can be because of traffic. It can be because your mate did not come. So you cannot attribute it to a pattern. Okay, so we'll start with the next story and we'll let the questions flow. I'll try to complete the story and we'll save the last 5 minutes for the for further question answers. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I hope we're excited for our third story. Yeah. So moral of this story, seasonality can be tricky, right? Even though, yeah, we have already discussed this one. So let me take up story 3, which is a tale from Canada. Okay, now we are in the OEM world. Like I said, it's the world of laptops and desktops and hyperconverged infrastructure, servers, etc. Right? So Eric is the sales and marketing head for the consumer side of business for North America. And this is for one of the top Fortune 100 companies. And Bhumi is Eric's go-to consultant for everything related to analytics. So in one of the weekly syncs, Eric shares a peculiar observation. He says that, you know what, Bhumi, for Canada, Q1, okay, so Q1 and Q2 are lower than last year's sales. Okay, so if you look at the quarterly data, Q1 and 2 are lower, but Q3 is significantly higher. Okay, so there is some pattern change that has happened. What could the possible reason be? Is what he's trying to find out. Okay, so Q1 and 2 are lower, but 3 is higher. I would love for all of you to take a stab. Right, I think someone has raised a hand also. Harpreet, do you want to go ahead with your question or with your input? So what are the possible reasons why this might happen?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Generally, college starts in second half, and
Okay.
that's why the raise of OEM has been
Okay.
very high in these times. Yeah.
That's a good attempt. That's a good attempt. That we are saying some amount of seasonality is playing out here. So if you know 12 months is the period. Yeah. So
second reason is in 2020 and 2021, the pandemic hit was on high, and the classes were shifting to online.
okay.
So that's why people were very inclined to buying these OEMs.
Okay, very good. So probably because there was demand, higher demand from laptops, it peaked. Very good attempts. Not capture your name.
Chandrahas.
Chandra's very good attempts, right? So you're trying to correlate things with the events that are happening, with the seasonality that may be implicit. Very good possible explanations. Now this data is not actually of 2021, but yes, very good try. Anybody else also wants to give it a shot?
Hi, Rajneet. I think it is as per the trend of seasonality. If you see, when 2019 was on the dropping side, we have 2020 on more dropping side. But if we see 2020 and 2021 peak, then it is on a higher side from 2019. So it is a gradual increase, but consistent with seasonality.
Very true, Lalit. So what Lalit is saying, that if you see Q3s are higher and these periods are lower, but it is, you know, each year is slightly higher than the previous year in Q3. So something interesting is happening, right? And on that note, you know, let me explain one concept before we actually stitch back this story, right? So Chandrahas and Lalit both have pointed to some some either consumer behavior changes or some big events that might be happening, right? There are other possible causes. For example, this year, for Q3, I got a better marketing budget, right? Possible cause. So I'm doing better in quarter. In this scenario, that was not the cause. But we should always, maybe use some framework to find out all possible reasons and then narrow down on what is the possible cause, right? So as a consultant, making sense of these changes, finding a pattern in chaos, right, is our job. So let's analyze what is this pattern change from Q1 to Q3. Okay. So to do this, one of the tools that was very useful was decomposition, time series decomposition. It's a very rich diagnostic tool in which you break a time series into its components. What are the components? A trend, which is an increasing, decreasing, linear, non-linear, best line of it. It's the direction in which you are heading. Then there is seasonality, right? So we said seasonality, for example, generally is 12 months. And within that 12 months, what is my period? What does a typical seasonal period look like? So here, if you see, this is 4 years of data, and the seasonality for each of the 4 years, this data looks very similar, right? Now, there is an optional third component, cyclic component. Like we discussed earlier, it does exist in a lot of data sets. In most of the data sets I've worked on, not really seen, right? And the fourth component, so there is logic to trend, to seasonality, to each of the components, but whatever remains, the last component is the irregular or random component. Okay, so it's very important to understand changes in each of these things have different business implication or causes. Let me give instances, let me give examples, right? So if your trend is suddenly dipping or rising, it might be maybe because of a competitor entry, because of a new product launch, because of some technology, some social change. Like for example, COVID. If you see the sales of laptops, there will be a sudden increase in the trend, right? So there is some business change happening in that sense if your trend changes. When it comes to seasonality, it might change because of a consumer behavior change, right? It might change because weather itself, like we saw in the case of Helios, weather itself was changing, right? Even in calendar-driven seasonality, right? Like we discussed, Diwali happens in different weeks or sometimes different months in different years. Good Friday sometimes may happen in week 8, sometimes in week 10 of a year. So therefore, even that results in seasonality changes, right? Now, irregular component. We might say there is nothing, no logic to irregular component. It is whatever remains, right? So why would we be interested in studying changes in the irregular component? But I would say this is one of the most interesting aspects. If your irregular component is increasing, for example, if it was just 5% of your data, now it is 10% of your data, it's time to get suspicious, guys. Maybe there is some variable, maybe a marketing spend, maybe a pricing, some important piece of data you are missing out in your forecast. And it is important to find that important piece of data, right? So it is time to get suspicious and dig deeper, right? With that, right, we have possible causes. Now, let me tell you what really happened in the Canada story. And we're very close. Some of the guesses that we had, Chandrahas, Lalit, we are very close. So what was happening here? And I'll give you a minute to absorb this graph and then I'll explain it, right? Just have a look at what's happening. We have the trend component and the seasonal and irregular component right now are in one, they're in the same blue line. So let's see, first of all, what are our observations? The first observation, look at the orange line. In just 3 years' time, we are reducing from 48K to 38K. That's a whooping 20% drop. So our trend is definitely reducing, right? but what's happening to the seasonal peaks? Do not worry about the absolute numbers. Exactly what do they mean? At this point, just try to understand that there is an increase, right? Here, the peaks here, this is the Black Friday, Cyber Monday period. So during this period, you might get high discounts. So see, in this first year, the peaks are around 120%. But in the second and third period, they're much higher, around 130%. Right? So let me explain what's happening here. Okay. Black Friday and Cyber Monday, these kind of periods, you might get a laptop, desktop for, a fraction of price, good 50% of the price. So this story is about a consumer behavior change. As the laptops, desktops prices had gone on increasing, now consumers are speculating. They are waiting for this evented period, for these events, because they might get something at 1/3 of the price or half the price, right? And for a commodity like a laptop, which is a non-essential, high-priced item, if I do not require it today, if I can wait for 3 months, wait for an Amazon Prime Day, wait for a Diwali offer, wait for a Christmas offer, wait for a Black Friday, Cyber Monday offer, why not, right? Is that not what we do? Sometimes when we want to buy a mobile, we wait for a few months and do it when we are going to get it at a much lesser price. So this is a beautiful story of a consumer behavior change, right? And how this can help, and Eric, right? Every time something has to be useful also, right? So how did it help Eric? Eric now can bargain for a better budget. They already have high budgets for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, but so that they're able to use this behavior change, he can pitch for a higher budget for this period so that they can absorb all the demand that is possibly there, right? So moral of the story, right? Each time series component, it sings a different song. The trend, seasonality, irregularity, and the business implications of the same is also very different, right? So one possible tool you can use is decomposition to understand all of these underlying factors, like if there is a consumer behavior change, there is possible launches, events, etc. It's just a tool that will help you dig deeper and deeper. Yeah. So that's our third story concluded. And hopefully with some of these stories, with some of these story learnings, you and your customers are happier. And at that point, let me now completely open the forum to question answers. I hope all of you have enjoyed and benefited from this session. Yes.
In what way we can differentiate between a trend and a seasonality? See, for example, if we have a irregular data set with our missing values or null values and all those things, so your trend and seasonality may not be accurate. It will be for any sales data set forecasting for the quarters or the sales of any kind of apparels for the quarter. So it's such kind of a data, how we can predict it actually.
Yeah. Okay. Good question, Subramanian. First of all, first thing you should always try to find, should my data set even be seasonal? Trend will always be there. It might not be a linear trend. It might not be increase. It might be a circular trend, but a line of best fit will always be there, right? Okay. Now, if you can explain why something should be seasonal, like in autoimmune, the first story, we did not have a clear logic, but we just guessed that third month is a peak, let's do it. You should first, Helios can be seasonal because there is a certain part of the year when pollen grains raise, and that is what it's trying to do, right? So first thing to always do is talk to a business stakeholder and understand, should seasonality even exist? There are techniques like this ACF plots and even correlation, the correlation that we learned in 10 standard, 12 standard, 8 standard, that can also, like the graph like this, right? Let me just go back to the graph that we had. That can also help you understand whether correlation exists or not. So for example, Just logical numbers I use. If the highest number here is less than 30%, I will assume it is not seasonal. If it is between 30 and 50%, possible seasonality, right?
Yeah.
Most business world cases, if you get more than 50-60%, I will at least assume it to be seasonal. These are just directions. You have to decide whether what numbers cutoffs you can do, right? And there are techniques how you can decompose the trend and seasonality. First step, find whether it should be seasonal or not. Do a correlation study and see what is your highest correlation figure, right? If it is more than 50%, it's probably seasonal. And then you extract trend and seasonality separately, right? There are techniques to do that.
So we can use the Python to determine, right? The Python method.
Python, Excel, all of them.
Matplotlib, like functions.
Yes.
To determine the trend.
Matplotlib is more of a visualization.
No, but other Python methods, which is there for trend and seasonality.
Yes. Okay. Time series forecasting packages have that provision. You can definitely do that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can do additive, you can do multiplication.
Additive and multiplication, correct. Yes.
Okay.
So do you trust ADF augmented Dickey-Fuller test?
Yes, we do ADF test, KPSS test, right?
No, what I'm asking is, do you trust? The lag one says stationary, the other lag says non-stationary. My question is, do you trust ADF?
Okay, good question. See, sometimes these metrics can be wrong, right? So generally, like I think ADF and KPSS, I would do both. If both of them indicate it is seasonal, not seasonal, then if both of them are giving the same results, probably yes. So generally 1% voting for something, not so much. If 2 people or 5 people are voting for the same result, the trust is higher. Right.
What is the other one? Yeah, other than ADF? KPSS,
double S.
Oh, okay. What about junk box test?
Okay. Sorry, don't remember that much about this test. Probably you can drop me a note on LinkedIn. Umesh, do share my LinkedIn as well, or I can also share with you. Feel free to connect and we can take up this discussion if I'm not able to answer now.
Sure.
So do you trust the PyCaret package?
The people that have worked with me definitely have worked on PyCaret, right? So I have not directly used, but I think that's a good package.
So then why all the Jillo forecasting went to Avery?
I am sorry, Bala Subramaniam. I haven't used some of the recent packages, so won't be answer that question of yours. But I hope some of the inputs helped you. I just we have the last 2 minutes if there are any other questions.
What I'm asking is, Jillo is one of the property company. They're selling the house. They used to PyCaret. Everything went to Avery. That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
So PyCaret. One of my friend is created PyCaret. I don't trust the PyCaret. I have, PyCaret has some of the things which is not able to take it into real time. Seasonality trend, and so what is your suggestion about oscillation behavior, wandering behavior, white noise, and random walk? So which one can be, look at the realization, look at the lag, which one can be central linear regression, just like, okay, this is very good. It has met with 3 assumptions: variation, variant, mean, autocorrelation. All 3 assumption is really constant. We can use generalized linear regression, not required to do SARIMA, AR model, ARIMA. Vector auto regression models. So any kind of assumption we can make to use generalized linear regression. Have you used like that? And which
see, there are standard steps.
Which behavior can be used?
Okay, let me answer that. That there are standard steps that you would use when you're doing time series, right? So there is also one more related question. Let's use the last few seconds. How do you do decomposition also, right? When you do time series forecasting, there, you would import your libraries, you would check, you would decompose. That is one of the things, that it could be multiplicative, additive. You'll see whether the data set is stationary or not, right? So there are various tests that you would do, KPSS, ADF, etc. Very standard steps. And you would also convert your data set to time series. By default, it may not be there in time series by, itself, right? After that, so after all of this data processing, only you will start your time series forecasting. And again, ARIMA, ARIMAX are very standard packages. There are a host of other algorithms also. Ideally, you would try many of them, right, before coming on to conclusion. Now, on how do you decompose, which is one question asked by Naveen, right? It depends on the tools, but there are two ways generally it is done: additive and multiplicative. Multiplicative, it means, see, again, there are some assumptions we can make. For example, if my trend is increasing, if you see this example, my trend is increasing, and more or less my peaks, the difference between the peaks and the dips is also increasing. So similarly, if both are decreasing, these two scenarios, I will generally go for multiplicative. Otherwise, I may go for additive, right? So either ways, you should try and see which gives you lower errors, right? So decomposition has a slightly different technique. You can do it in Excel, you can do it in Python, right? Team, I think, yeah.
Ma'am, just a last question. Is it
Sure.
really necessary to remove trend and seasonality before forecasting?
No, it is not. This is, here we have used more it of as a diagnostic tool to understand what's happening. In Canada stories, we were not doing forecasting. We were trying to make sense of time series data, right? So it is not a necessary step to decompose before forecasting. All right. I can take one more last question if that helps. Okay, all right.
Ma'am, there is a question from Harish Reddy. When you take historical data, how do you take irregular year like COVID into account, like remove the year altogether or use any method?
Very good question. And that's a good point to end our session, right? See, with an event like COVID, no amount of algorithms can help you. This is the time, there is a other world of techniques that we have learned, descriptive techniques. We talk to people who are experts. We do some kind of analog study. What is an analog study? We see ailment, like, okay, something similar in history happened, okay, and we see what happened as an impact of that. Something similar to COVID, right? There were, I think, a lot of diseases shared that when that had happened, how did my forecast change, or how did my regression change, or how did any of the results change? So when an event like this happened, you shift your focus. You really cannot do good time series forecast in many of the data sets, right? In retail data set, in pharma, there might be some areas where you can still do for a similar, you can still do time series forecasting, but you cannot even take the history before COVID because the world has changed with COVID, right? So you do more of the descriptive, you do more of the judgmental methods, you do more of analog studies, holdout studies, and those kind of methods when an event like this happens. I hope that helps. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Rajneet. On behalf of Analytics Vidya, I would like to thank you for this wonderful session. on time series, and the stories which you told, I am really confident that all of us really learned a lot from it.
Sure. Sure.
And I will leave Rajneet's LinkedIn account in the chat. People who want to connect her, please go through that link.